Hold on for 1 second. And we are live. We are live with Ntr Jabari. Okay, great. We just got the notice on Facebook that we're live.
Wonderful.
Sinette Cheryl, can you go to the Rakasta Shin chat and let them know we're live? Awesome. We are live. So excited for this. This is going to be very, very helpful for people who feel kind of lost in where to start. Come on in, people. See, Michael Myers. He says, I'm new to spirituality. Well, this is going to be very helpful. Anke Ma'at Fifi and Sinette Cortia.
Anke Ma'at.
We've got our initiates here. Well, Michael, you have come to the Right Tuesday talk. Just hang tight, and I'm going to introduce our guest shortly, but this is definitely helpful to people who are new to spirituality. Anke Ma'at Shenka, welcome. Come on in. So today we have a very unfamiliar face. This guy right here, he grabbed me in the subway and said, I want people to know who I am. Have me on your show. I'm just kidding. I am totally and completely kidding. This is Ntr Ntpi Jabari Osaze, who is the high priest at the Shrine of Ma'at, and I'm incredibly partial because I am a priestess from the Shrine of Ma'at, and it is because of his wife, Anika, who was the high priestess and Jabari, that I am a priestess, and I'm forever and eternally grateful for that, and also for the Shrine of Ma'at, because it is my spiritual home and something that, in part, I had been looking for since I was 8 years old. And so I really appreciate this. One of the things that we have that is super awesome is that Jabari is a historian. He's a historian, and he has also been studying and learning the comedic ways and African spiritual ways since he was in high school. And that is incredible. Incredible. He went to Roman Catholic school from first grade. Was it preschool or first grade, Jabari? First grade?
From kindergarten.
From kindergarten, guys.
Yeah, I went to kindergarten. I didn't go to preschool. So as soon as I went to school, I was in a Roman Catholic school.
And Roman Catholic school,
yeah,
the whole
all the way
time.
up to college. Yeah.
Yeah, all the way through college, exactly. So we are lucky to have him here on, and he's an excellent instructor. He makes so much sense. He's very methodical, has the best slides on the East Coast, if I might add. So without further ado, I welcome our high priest, Ntr Ntpi Jabari Osaze. Now, today we are going to talk about the 4 golden eras of Kemet. And I said, Jabari, I said, listen, people sometimes feel overwhelmed with all of the thousands and thousands and thousands of years of the queens and the kings and everything we built and the wars and the rising and the falls and the Nile, which is the Hapi, and all the words that are Greek. It is just a lot. I said, so if you could give, a major outline, like a nice structural skeleton of comedic history, the history of Kemet, so that when you go back and watch this again, you will have your structure. It's like the structure to a house. And then you go in and you put in the kitchen and you put in the bathroom and the living room and your hardwood floors and all that good stuff. Okay. So tonight what we're doing, or what Jabari's going to be doing, is laying out the foundation, pouring that concrete on the ground, building the structure, the weight-bearing bones, and putting our floors up and the roof, so that when you take this, while you're watching this, and when you rewatch it, because a lot of people say they rewatch these, and I'm really glad that they do. This is a nice, incredible starting point for you to continue to read about comedic history, African history, so that you can fill in the house, you can fill in the structure, and it doesn't feel so overwhelming. One of the things I know, because I've experienced it myself, is where do you start?
Mm-hmm.
You want to learn about African history, and you have this whole entire continent with us being the first people on the planet, everything that we've done and everything that's happened to us. Where do you start? Well, tonight We are going to start in Kemet. And Ntpi Jabari, welcome.
Oh, Dua so much for that introduction to the family. I'm always honored when I get to come before the Tuesday Talk family as well, because I know that you all are talking about important things, and it allows people to interact with each other as they learn and they meet folks who have been doing good work in our community for such a long time. So Dua. And Zalditu, let me say Dua to you as well. Thank you for saying I'm a great master teacher. I don't know if I would live into that. And one of the reasons why it's amazing to see that is because I was trained by some of the folks that would later be considered some of the most important teachers that we've had here in the West. I was trained by Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen and Dr. Jean-Henry Clark, and definitely I say this name, Dr. James Turner, and I say that name and have to say to you, a lot of folks don't know Dr. James Turner, but he was actually the person that put more work into Jabari Osaze. And then, of course, on the spiritual side, there's, of course, Baba Heru Ankh Ra Samad Se Ptah, who is the founder and the chief priest of the Shrine of Ptah and the elder of the Shrine of Ma'ad. And so those four individuals and many others actually assisted me in rounding out who Jabari Osaze would become. And so let me say Dua to you. I'm so honored that you've said that, and I really think that we'll have an interesting discussion.
Dua, yes, Dua. Definitely.
Okay, so we're talking a bit about the four golden eras, and I really want to say that the way you've described this is accurate, Abu Sashad. I mean, there are so many names, so many rulers, so many important people, over 300 rulers. I mean, think about how many people that is. And I'm one of those folks who have studied all 300 rulers. I'm in some ways, even as much as I am a historian and the chief priest of the Shrine Herd, I say. So sometimes the smallest detail will really just get me excited. And so I've studied all 300, and in studying all 300, you begin to recognize that you can actually understand the overall thrust of Kemet by looking at four periods. If you look at four periods in the life of this great land known as Kemet, that the Greeks and others later would come to call Egypt, you actually have a better understanding of how Kemet occurred, who were the most important folks who assisted Kemet in being the land that it was. And also, when you look at it that way, it's really hard to argue against the African nature of ancient Kemet. Because Kemet was a powerful land. People from all over the known world would come to Kemet, right? But the question is, how was Kemet devised? Who were the people that did it? And who were the people that allowed it to exist for all these 3 millennia, all these 3,000 years? And so I want to show a slide if I can. And let me say to you, this slide just came right out my book. It has very few bells and whistles, but it gets the job done. This slide shows the four rulers who in this period, these periods, allowed Kemet to be this powerful land. And we'll talk more about them in detail. But definitely I want you to see, first starting with the face of King Narmer. King Narmer. I still find it absolutely amazing to me that every hour of every day, if you have the 87 cajillion channels that I have via cable TV, I think you'll find it very interesting that with all of those channels, you'll find a documentary about Kemet that airs maybe every other hour. There's something on Kemet. But with all of those documentaries, it is rare to never really. What you'll never see is an image of the person that put Kemet together. Take a look at that image. Take a look at him. He's the one that actually comes from further into the interior of Africa and moves towards the north coast, the northeast coast of Africa, and has a battle with the people that are there. And then after being victorious, puts these two lands together. And so for the remaining period of ancient Kemet, we're talking about 3,000 years, they will refer, the Kemetic people will refer to Kemet as the two lands. Sometimes they'll even call it the two ladies. But I want you to recognize that this is based on this ruler. And let me say to you, I know that someone said that he's the Scorpion King. There is literally a king that has the name Scorpion. And that is not Narmer. That is his father. His father has the name Scorpion. And so that is where they get the name Scorpion from. His father is not believed to be the person who put Kemet together. So take a look at Narmer. This happens in 3100 BCE, which means it happens over 5,000 years ago. For those of you who are a little bit new to understanding how the time frame works, understand that essentially what historians do is they go back in time past the year 0, and those numbers, as they go further away from the year 0, they get higher. And then after the year 0, then they go in the opposite direction higher. Does that make sense? So obviously, you know, after 0, every year, such as the year we're in, gets higher. So next year will be 2023, correct?
Correct.
Well, in the period before 0, that's not how it worked. That's not how historians describe it. Let's put it that way. So you see, when we say 3,100 years ago, we're saying that's 3,100 years before the year 0. And so you'd add 3,100 plus 2022, and you would get 5122. So this event occurred 5,122 years ago, about. That is when Narmer comes north. And then we see Kemet go into a powerful period, generally called the Old Kingdom. And then after that, Kemet has a big fall into what is then later called the first intermediate period. This is when Kemet was really struggling, when foreign people were able to just walk across his borders and do whatever they wanted. This was a very difficult period, the first intermediate period. And there were lots of people who said they were king, but none of them really were king. They were kind of more like people in charge of small regions. And then we see a group of rulers come from a place in Kemet into what we would consider the South today, that actually starts to put Kemet back together. And they come out of that city known to them as Waset, which means sort of the seat of power. Waset. And then what they do is they slowly begin to take a little bit more land, consolidate a little bit more. There are 3 of them. They're generally called the Ntr rulers. We'll talk about them in a moment. And then they conclude with the 4th ruler in that line, the man named Mentuhotep. Look at Mentuhotep, the second face there. Clearly, if you look at his features and you look at his skin color, they say is sometimes depicted symbolically. And that may be possible, but very clearly, whenever we see Mentuhotep, he also has very African features. And in fact, so do his queens. He has several queens.
Mm-hmm.
So he puts Kemet back together, and he leads to what is called the Middle Kingdom. And then there are 2 dynasties, essentially, where Kemet is in great power, and then things fall apart again. And during this period, foreign people come into Kemet, and they take control of Kemet. And then a family from the same city that Mentuhotep was from, Waset, begin a rebellion. This story is prepared, is ready for a movie. Why there's no movie, I don't know, Abutsa Shot.
We're going to do it.
No, I don't know. The father that starts the fight could be played by Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman said, I'm tired of this. The only people that should be on the throne of Kemet are native Kemetic people, the Remech. And he leads rebellion and then gets killed very quickly. And then we slowly see these rulers come forward. His eldest son fights. He dies. He's killed in battle. And then the wife of the first king, probably led by, let's see, maybe Angela Bassett should play that role, right?
I know, right?
Gravitas, right? Viola Davis should play that role, maybe. Someone with gravitas that you could see the pain because they killed her husband, they killed her elder son, and she has to raise her younger son while still leading the battle.
Why can't I do it?
I'm talking about someone who has acting credibility, someone who's been doing it for a long time. And maybe her son should be played by a young man first. But then when he gets older, we have like a Michael B. Jordan playing King Amos, completing the battle, right?
Right.
Anyway, that's what happened. And then we see King Amos. Look at that statue of King Amos. Look at that statue of King Amos. Beautiful. Beautiful. And very African. By the way, Sashad, I just saw this statue with my own eyes. It is in the Louvre.
King Amos?
Yes, the one with King Amos. I just saw it with my own eyes. And I took video and pictures, and you have no idea. And then, so he comes forward with his mother and then with his beautiful wife, and they put Kemet back together. And because they lead a successful rebellion, then the new kingdom begins. And that's when Kemet is an empire. That's where we see rulers like Tutankhamen, who they have shortened his name, and I don't know why, but this is the king that some people call King Tut come forward, and Hatshepsut is in the new kingdom, and Ramesses the Great is in the new kingdom, and Akhenaten is in the new kingdom. So all of these rulers that we know of are all in the new kingdom. This is when Kemet is at his power. Imhotep III, Jehutimes III, all of these powerful rulers. And then things begin to wane. Foreign people begin to play around in Kemet. And we see those kings in, once again, the same city, Waset. Those kings, those priests, they actually ask for assistance from the nation to the south. And then we see the Nubians, the Kushitic rulers come forward. And then you're seeing King Chabaka, who completes the reunification of Kemet. So these are the four periods. Led by King Narmer, led by King Mentuhotep, led by King Amos, and led by King Chabaka. These are the four periods. And you can see the distance in time. The story of Chabaka is in like the 8th century BCE, as you can see. The story of Amos is in the 16th century BCE. The story of Mentuhotep is in the 21st into the 20th century BCE. And then we see in the 32nd century BCE, King Narmer. This graph comes out of my book, 7 Little White Lies, The Conspiracy to Destroy the Black Self-Image. Does that make sense? Are we clear about what we're talking about here? And if you have questions, folks, let me know.
It seems like we're clear that people aren't asking any questions about like what's going on, stuff like that. And so, Jabari, again, he just laid the structure down in very broad strokes of
right.
Of our Kemetic history. So yeah.
Right. Now we can talk about the individual periods, right? So you see the first period includes King Narmer, right? You see that. Let me see if I can just go to the next slide. Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Let me stop.
Right, which page is this on in 7 Little White Lies?
I think it's page 72.
Okay.
72 or 74. It's on page 74. It's on page 74 of the book. So you'll actually see that same exact graph that you're looking at there in the book. And it will help you to understand how we recognize this powerful period where these great African rulers come to reign. So let's talk a little bit about Narmer. Can we do that? Let's talk
Absolutely.
a little bit about Narmer. Well, we're just giving you the big brushstrokes, the big brushstrokes. How Medu Neter unites Africans. What I take away is how Medu Neter reunites Africans and how we can learn two things about that. Clearly, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that sometimes when we talk about Kemet almost like it is a land with people that were all the same. But in actuality, the story of Kemet is likely how people in the region who were different came together, how Africans at this period of time come together.
Right.
And that's really how important this is. They didn't all say the same thing, even necessarily believe the same thing. They all had different versions of their comedic lives. And so that's how this works. Okay, so let's take a look. Look at this image. It is a close-up from that device called the Palette of Narmer. And so you're seeing Narmer here. I want you to know that Narmer comes from an ancient city known as Nekken. Say Nekken with me.
Nekken.
And it is the city of Heru. Heru was very important in that city. The Greeks came and then called it Hierakonpolis later. And he ends up moving north to put the people in the north under his dominion. Before I do that, I just want you to look at that face again. You should know that this image is not in Kemet. This image is in a small museum known as the Williams Flinders Petrie Museum in London. I know that we have a good brother that is in the UK that regularly tunes into our broadcast and is a part of the extended family of the Shrine of Ma'at. Brother, I think his name is Robert James. I thought I saw him.
Yeah, he's on here. He's here.
Brother Robert, I'm not sure if you're in London. I want to say you are. But if you are, have you been to the Williams Flinders Petrie Museum? It's near the British Museum. It's within walking distance. And so this is where you'll see it. And Sashad, it's just sitting on a shelf. It's not like
I believe it.
You could pass it very easily.
Of course.
Oh, and Michael Myers is also in London. You need to go and look at this image. When you do, take a good picture of yourself and share it with us so you can see the face of this ruler in all of his confidence. When I look at this, I see confidence in his face. Look at his face.
You know who I see?
Like he got a little attitude, right?
You know who I see? Like a lot of people see? Mike Tyson.
Yeah, I think Mike Tyson's face structure is similar. I think that's fair. Yeah. And see, Robert James is in London. I didn't realize that Michael Myers was as well. The museum is called the William Flinders Petrie Museum. It's probably, I think it's a short walk, a half mile maybe.
Williams what?
British Museum. Williams Flinders Petrie.
Flinders Peachtree.
William Flinders Petrie Museum. Yeah. He was an important early, and I'm going to use this word advisedly, Egyptologist. And he has this museum that has all these small pieces, not really the large pieces that you'll see in the British Museum or in the Met or in the Louvre, but all these tiny pieces that are important. And so you should absolutely go. That's where you'll see the head of Narmer. So you should know that his father was the king that is sometimes called Scorpion, right? And there's some people who argue it's possible that Scorpion was the one that reunited Kemet. But because we actually see on this device, and this device is the palette of Narmer, because we actually see, here's another image of it, him on one side, look at the left side, you see him here, actually taking power over the folks in the north. Because you see that clearly, it is clear that on the other side, he's wearing the other crown. This is why we say definitively that he is actually the king of both lands. So on the front, we see him wearing the bulbous crown that's for the area of the south, right? Today we would call it the south. He would have considered it the north, but they call it the south. We call it the south today. And then he has battle with them. And we even know that, look, Heru is helping him. Can you see the falcon in front of his face?
Yep.
This is the concept that Heru is guiding him to have victory. It looks like this other group of people had 6,000 troops. You might actually see this image that looks a little bit like the person that he's defeating here. And you see these fronds coming out of his back. This means that there were 6,000 troops that he defeated. And we even have the name of the king that was defeated right here. Very interesting. Very interesting. His name seems to also be, some people think that part of his name is a harpoon, but we don't know how to vocalize his name. But he is defeated in what is called the smiting pose. We see this pose for the rest of Kemetic history, and all of its rulers seem to be referencing this pose itself, that they can take dominion over other people in the region in order to be in control. And then on the other side, we see him marching into northern Kemet, and he's done battle with these folks. And he puts Kemet back in order. It even seems like he had to do battle against a walled city. And that's what we see on the bottom here with this bull breaking into what looks like a walled city. They are telling us the story of Narmer in victory. Here's the line drawing. It's reversed though, as you can see. Here's the line drawing. So on the left, you're seeing him already be victorious. On the right, you can see him moving forward. And it's really an interesting piece, this palette of Narmer. It's usually considered the world's first historical document. And that comes from a group of people who have been told that they have no history, that they actually have the world's oldest history. And so I find that absolutely fascinating. So as we move forward, I want you to just take a look, by the way. Here is the mace head belonging to his father. It's called the scorpion mace head. And as you look at it, I think it's interesting because you'll see an image of scorpion and you'll see other images that are meant to represent things that are occurring. Here's a line drawing of what it looks like. It seems that he was assisting with irrigating land, and that there were actually areas that he was in charge of, and they did sacrifice to those areas, right? But because only one side is showing, some people think it's possible that he was wearing the other crown on the other side too. We don't know that. We don't know that. And so this is one of the reasons why we say that Scorpion was not the uniter of Kemet. But what if the other side did have him wearing the other crown? Then we would understand it a little bit differently.
Jabari, there was a question, and I only captured part of it. It says, for saving and sharing information, wisdom, knowledge, why is it that most of Africa seem to rely on oral tradition, memory, whereas Egypt relied, or Kemet relied heavily on writing and documentation?
That's an interesting discussion. That's an interesting question. But let me put it this way. I think that Kemet also relied on the oral tradition extensively. Scholars of the language and languages in general, we were talking about linguists and philologists, folks who actually study language and the written word. they actually will tell you that some of Kemet's early documents, the way that they're written, they believe that they were initially oral documents as well.
Mhm.
So that I believe what we're really seeing is that Kemet is one of those nations that becomes one of the world's first literate nations. Some of the first writing occurs in Kemet. Also in a place called Sumer, that is also likely brought into existence by people of African descent. And so the earliest scripts are brought to the world by Africans. But you should know that before that period, no one had writing. The whole world, no one wrote things. Now, sometimes people hear me say that, and they say they didn't have languages. Of course they had languages.
Right.
They just weren't written.
Right.
They just weren't written. And there's some languages today that aren't written. It's not unusual to find languages that exist in the world today that aren't written. There are groups of people who if they're going to write something, they'll even write in the script of another language because their language doesn't have a script. So it's not as unusual as you might think. But understand that Kemet is a nation that, yes, begins to write things down. And because they write things down, that's one of the reasons why we have such an intricate historical record coming from this area in Northeast Africa.
So, Jabari, I have a question, which is a little bit of a tangent.
Yes.
The letters that are written, the letters that are used in European languages are Arabic letters, correct? Like Spanish and Portuguese, Italian, French.
There are some. They're not really Arabic. Numbers are considered to have come from the Arabic world, but letters come from. We'll see letters that seem to have come from the Greek alphabet, and the Greek alphabet seems to have gotten a great influence from the Phoenician alphabet and possibly even the Ethiopian alphabet, known as the alphabet of the Ethiopian language known as Amharic is an early language as well.
Right.
So let's understand that they come out of Africa. And there have also been some scholars that are beginning to say, if you look at the Medu Neter, some of the glyphs might have also turned into what we would now traditionally call letters today. Because, the Medu Neter, while it has a phonetic value, it also has a pictorial value. The image itself means something. And so in some ways, it is different than the letters that we see today. And so that is, for me, fascinating. But we do see that as Kemet begins to develop something that looks a little bit more like writing, when we see Demotic coming forward, Demotic seems to influence the later scripts as well. Okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Let's continue. So let's talk a little bit more about what we know about Narmer. We believe that his mother is likely a lady named Sesh, who was the wife of Scorpion. It seems that the ruler before Scorpion might have been Tejenu and then Ka. So there are lots of things that we know about what happens before, but keep in mind this is often considered a period right before writing is really, really popular. So the Pal of Narmer has things that represent concepts, but not, and we could consider that some of it is writing as well, but we don't see a full range of the glyphs. That it's still in its infancy to some degree. Then there's some people who say that Narmer has two names, that he's both Narmer and Menes. And then there are people who say, well, maybe they're different. This is very early in the recording of history. And being very early, that's what causes some of the confusion. I'm not going to go into this in extreme detail. Oh, and I should let you know that Narmer's wife is a lady named Imhotep. And Neat is a warrior, a protectress deity. So it's possible he must have also played a role having that kind of name in the battles as well. which I find very interesting. And there's some we see artifacts for her.
Awesome.
As we move forward a little bit, and I'm not going to spend as much time on this, we see another ruler come forward in the third dynasty. So Narmer is sometimes considered to be dynasty 0. Why they consider him dynasty 0 and not dynasty 1, we could talk about forever. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but most historians consider him dynasty 0. And then after that, those rulers coming shortly after in dynasty 1. By the time we get to dynasty 3, we see another important ruler, a ruler known as Djoser Neteriket. Say Djoser.
Djoser
Neteriket.
Neteriket.
I know very well you can only hear Abu Tsat and myself. You're supposed to be saying it at home too. Why? Because it's going to help you remember the names. And it's also important in the ancient African concept. In order for these great ancestors to continue to live, we must continue to say their names.
That's right.
And so you see here Djoser in this statue that is likely a Ka statue, a statue that was meant to be a house for his soul if he'd intended to return to his tomb. And you can see he has a Nemes cloth on, right? But he has a stylized Nemes cloth that we haven't seen. It's fascinating. Can you see how it's like cut into points on the sides? We see the Nemes cloth, this particular crown, used for kings for a very long period of time, for the next 3,000 years. But we've never seen it cut into points on what looks to be very defined locks. We only see that under Djoser. And Djoser is important. Djoser is important because under Djoser, we see burials go from, let's start here, sand pit burials to rock pit burials to these devices that are called mastabas. Now, mastaba is actually an Arabic word. Generally speaking, when we use this, the Kemetic people called this device, they called it the Purjet, the house of eternity. And then we see the mastaba or Purjet lead into another structure where this great thinker actually builds one very large Purjet. And he doesn't build it out of mud brick, he built it out of stone. And then he puts another layer on top. And then the king is still alive. So he puts another layer on top. King is still alive. He puts another layer on top. Now he has 4 layers and the king is still alive. So then he expands from there until it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. This large, massive monument in stone. You should know that we call this sometimes the step pyramid. I've known people to call the step Merkut using another word for pyramid, but this building has a name. It's called Kebu Neteru. Kebu Neteru, which means libation to the divine. It's a powerful name. And you should know this is the world's first building in stone, built by that great right hand to King Djoser, known as Imhotep. So
Jabari,
yes,
there are a lot of questions.
Okay, yes, I'd love to hear
Questions pertaining to the actual Merkut or the pyramids and the builders, and also with Sumer. We might have to have another talk on Sumer.
Oh,
I think would be a good conversation, but kind of a smidge off topic for today.
It would be off topic, but I'll just say this really quickly so you know what I'm talking about. Sumer is a contemporary of early Kemet. It's another great nation outside of Africa, by the way. It is believed to have been perhaps established by Africans who had left the continent. It's not far from the continent of Africa. In fact, Sumer is that area in the area that later becomes Assyria, that later becomes, some people call it Babylon, all of that. But you should know that it is originally called Sumer. So when you hear about the Sumerians, those are the people from Sumer. And they have an early civilization that is also influential. It does not last at long at all in comparison to Kemet. But in the early period where Kemet is getting itself going, Sumer is in some ways a sibling that's further north to ancient Kemet.
I'm going to have him back on, you guys. So, because
They have a lot more questions, huh?
People have a lot of questions just in general about Sumer.
Yes.
Because, you know, they're like, well, Sumer was here. We find this older and this and that. I think a nice comprehensive conversation about Sumer would do us all some good.
There's some people who say Sumer is older than Kemet.
Right.
I disagree. You even, if you heard me on Sonetta the other day, I always make this comment. What people often do is they look at proto-Sumer. They look at Sumer before it's a strong nation, and they date that period. And then they look at Kemet as it's in its dynastic phase. And that's not a way to actually judge which nation is older. That's almost like me saying that who is older? Let me give two people, myself or my twin brother. Let's say I have a twin brother. And instead of counting our years, we start when my brother is born and he's a baby, and then they start counting me when I go to school for the first time. That's when I kind of begin to develop my identity, right? When I'm going to school and meeting other people. It would seem that I'm younger because you're starting me when I actually am a young person being schooled, and starting him when he's an infant. But you have to count us both at the same time. You got to look at two infants to see how old something is. And that is not what they do when they look at Kemet. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense.
It does.
Because if you're going to look at proto-Kemet, I always use this phrase. You have to look at Nabta Playa. Nabta Playa is one of the earliest sediments in the area that we would know as Kemet. And it is so old that it's older than Sumer. It's older than Sumer. So you have to look at proto-Kemet and proto-Sumer to see which nation, which region is considered older. Okay.
We're going to have him back.
Yes.
He don't know yet. He's coming back.
And you should know that there are people that will disagree with me. That is, I think that if you look at the time frames, there's no way to disagree. There's even a book. I have the book, actually. It's called History Begins at Sumer. I have the book. I'm looking at it on myself. God has seen me look at books in this room. There are thousands of books in this room. You only see this small smidgen, but there are thousands. This whole wall in front of me is completely covered with books. When people walk into this room, they go, wow. That's what they say when they look up. So she's used to seeing me reach above and pull a book down. Know that we have to know a lot more about this period.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Okay. So I want you to know I'm not tossing it to the side, the Sumer questions, but we're going to stay on topic with the four pillars for this.
We're talking about Kemet today.
We're talking about Kemet today. Also, one of the questions was, since Kemet had different types of Africans, the language was what galvanized people. I can have, you know what? Let me look at the specific question. Hold on. That's a slightly off topic too, and I can go grab some linguists who have the history who can answer that question as well. Was writing incorporated to galvanize Africans, or was it to include people from farther northwest? I think that
there are probably several things that galvanized Kemet into a nation, right? They had agreements around how they would live along this river known as the Hapi, that later people called the Nile. By the way, Nile, I believe, comes from the word Nile or nothing, so I don't like to use it. So that's part of what happened. You have to work in tandem in order to have a great nation. If you don't work in tandem and everybody has to be a small farmer to feed themselves, it's really hard to have a nation that becomes a high-tech nation.
Right.
One of the reasons why we see writing is because of collaboration. I want you to understand why I'm saying this. In order to develop a script, in order to develop scribes, in order to develop people who are learned enough that they are considered your writers, your people who are of high education, you can't have them spending all their time in the field trying to grow food for their family. So as these Africans were able to work together, then they were able to get to a point when we actually see that there are some people who could spend all their time on writing, on studying, and others could spend all their time on becoming the highest skilled possible artist. So that's why we see incredible art, amazing statues in Kemet. In order to develop the expertise to do that, to work in this stone, to actually be able to work so diligently in metals, you have to have people who don't have to spend all of their time in the fields. Right. So the collaboration is what allows Kemet to be such this amazing place. We don't think that that Imhotep, who was the designer of the world's first building of stone that I just showed you, he wasn't spending all his time in the fields. If he did, he never would have become the Imhotep that we know, right? So it's the collaboration that creates the greatness.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's exactly what it is. It's because these Africans said, hey, wait a minute, we can work together and do more rather than work on our own or work in competition and do less. And I'm going to tell you something that is mind-boggling that I think very few scholars have analyzed. Kemet is in a desert. You've heard this. Kemet is in a desert. How does a nation in the desert produce so much food that they can actually have people who don't have to actually be in the fields? How does it do it? This is mind-boggling. They do it because they actually are able to live in harmony. In Ma'at. With not only each other, but also the universe. So, for example, the other thing that doesn't happen, I mean, we know that they were great agriculturists in Kemet, but do you develop the most skilled astronomers if they have to just plant and be subsistence farmers? It's the collaboration that creates the greatness. That's what happens. And so I'm hoping that you understand that because they're able to look at the heavens long enough to recognize the manner in which it works in a cyclical manner, that allows them to now live in this desert area. And I want you to understand this. A lesser people would have run from Kemet and said that place is cursed. What do I mean? Imagine these Africans, the first people to get to that area, actually being in an area that was very arid. Maybe it wasn't desert yet, but it was becoming desert. They could see that if they were growing. Hey, man, we're actually able to grow less and less. Seems like things are getting drier here. This is a problem. Maybe we should move away. That's what people usually do when things become drier and they can't eat. And you'd figure that a small number of them said, hey, this wonderful river, it's extremely long and wide and broad. We could live near the river. And we could actually use the river to grow food. Maybe we don't have to flee. And then imagine them chilling there with their little farm. And then they notice that the water is getting higher and higher and higher. And then it floods violently. It destroys everything. You might say, man, I lived in the area. It started to become desert. That was terrible. I found the river and said, I can live around the river. And then the river overflowed and destroyed everything. I'm running as far as I can. This area is cursed. A less spiritually intact people would have done that. A group of people who had not developed wisdom and did not see themselves as living in harmony with the very nature of the universe, the very order of the universe, would have fled. They'd have gone away. They'd have moved further west. They would have moved further south. But instead, because they had been looking at the stars, they recognized that a sun of a different solar system. You do know that all of those stars we see are suns. We have the sun that's in our solar system, the sun that I wish would give us a little bit more heat because this May has not been that great yet. But the sun in our solar system is amazing to us. And then in the night sky, we see all these stars. Each of them is a sun, and they have their own, most of them have their own planets around them. Did you know that? A star is not different than a sun. So these wonderful Africans had been looking at the world long enough and looking at the world in relation to distant suns that they were able to see the cycle in the movement of the suns. And it is believed that they would have had to be looking at it at least for 26,000 years to understand its movements. The 26,000 year cycle is when we see the configuration in the stars seem to reset because they move, at least from our vantage point on Earth, they don't stay exactly in the same place. Over 26,000 years, they reset. So that Leo, the constellation of Leo, that we can see in our night sky is not in the same place as it was when Kemet was getting started. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It has moved a little bit from our vantage point on Earth in the night sky. You've got to be looking at the stars for a really long time to understand how they move. And then how to understand the cycles of the ones that you see. And so they looked at one star, the star that they called Saperet. Saperet. And you know, later people call it all kinds of things. One of the things they call it is Sirius. Did you know that the ancient Kemetic people described Saperet before anyone called it Sirius? So when you look at Sirius XM radio, yes, it's a representation.
They biting from us,
yes. It's sometimes called the dog star. Anyway, they were able to tell that when Sirius seemed to rise at a certain time, they would be able to understand when the flood would come. They'd be able to count to when they would see the flood. So that instead of saying, you know what, this flood is horrible. We live in a desert. We see a beautiful river and then it floods. Let's get the hell out of here. Instead of doing that, they were able to know when the flood was going to occur. And the flood brings all of this extremely rich soil from deeper into the interior of Africa.
Right.
How can you say that these Africans that were living on the coast didn't have reverence for the rest of Africa when they understood that the fertile soil from further in their continent was the way that they were able to live?
That's right.
They had great reverence for the rest of the continent. And so anyway, we see this deep black soil come with the water from the flood. And that allows them to grow their food next to the Hapi. And then they watch the cycles over and over again. By the way, when the flood was at its highest, you couldn't work in the fields. What did they do? Lots of other things. Some of those people were put to work by the government of Kemet to build things. Those wonderful monuments weren't built by enslaved people. We know that. We know how much they got paid. We know what they ate. We know who their wives and their children were. We know all of that. We know all of that because we can go and find where they lived and then do archaeological digs where they lived.
And also in Jabari's book, Seven Little White Lies, there's a chapter about this very topic in the book. The book, if you want to get a segue into learning about African history, Kemetic history, just a place to start, Seven Little White Lies is a good place to start. Because just like he speaks really well and teaches, and it makes a lot of sense, he writes in the very same fashion. Okay, so like I would start with Seven Little White Lies. Like anybody can get that book and start from there. It's a really good book.
Dwa, yeah, the check is in the mail. The check is in the mail for you.
Thank you very much.
Promotion for my book. Thank you.
So where were we? Before we?
Yes, it is on Amazon. Sinet Ryle. It is on Amazon. However, if you buy it from my website, I think my website is down right now. If you buy it from my Sinet Ryle, you're already part of the shrine.
Right. I was about to text you.
Yeah, we talk.
The reason
why I'm suggesting that you might get it for me directly is because I can sign it then instead of
Right. That's what I was getting ready to say. Jabari can autograph it for you.
and we'll talk offhand because there's an exchange that should occur with Sanet Rael and I. We'll talk outside. So anyway,
Right.
you should know that as you understand how this movement occurs on the continent and how these great Africans understand their world, then you're able to really see how Africa becomes the parent of the rest of civilization. This is an important concept. So I'm going to go a little bit more quickly here, Abutsashat, and I'm not going to give this its proper time. But this is really supposed to be a primer. So we talked about Kebu Neteru being built by being designed and built by Imhotep for Djoser, right? Right?
I think so. We talked about
that's what we were just talking about before we went into this riff about the importance of the river, which is a really important riff, by the way.
Right.
It's a really important riff because I always say to people, you know that I'm a historian, but I'm a priest, right? So I'm not going to just read history and then say that happened there and that's why it's important. I want you to understand that understanding history, understanding the movement, understanding the legacy, understanding the actual philosophy of your ancestors will help you understand whether they lived a life of divine balance and how, if they did live a life of divine balance, they did it. So shortly after Imhotep, we have another ruler come forward. His name is Seneferu. Seneferu. Take a look at Seneferu here. He's another powerful ruler. Can you see he's wearing the dual crown that comes down to him from Narmer? Can you see that? This is so important. This is so important. And so Seneferu actually starts by building one Mirkut. It's possible that his father was starting it before him, but we know that he at least completes it. He starts to build one Mirkut, and it seems pretty clear that his goal is for him to actually build the flat-sided Mirkut that we see as the Mirkut today. Because before that, the step Mirkut obviously has steps, right? Well, it seems that Seneferu wants to build the flat-sided Mirkut. So he starts with this one. And it looks like they didn't excavate all of the sand down to the bedrock. So they were building on sand. And what does sand do? Sand shifts. And so that means that they were not able to complete. They were not able to complete the bent Mirkut, not in the way that they wanted to. So you can see that it has this shift in angle from 54 degrees to 43 degrees. So this one was not the building that he wanted it to be. It's hard for me to say it's a failure, but yeah, it didn't work the way it was. You can consider it a failure.
It was the first attempt, you know.
It starts falling apart. Yeah. So then he tries again. He tries again. Then he actually excavates all of the sand underneath this one. But you can see that the way that he builds the Mirkut, can you see that they have like these taller walls and he was just putting bricks next to it? That doesn't work either. This doesn't work. He doesn't tie the outside of the Mirkut properly into the inside of the Mirkut. This is called the Maidum Mirkut. And we know that this is, as massive, as amazing as it is also a failure. He tries more. And then after that, he is able to excavate all of the sand. He's actually able to build it in a manner that he can build all of the outer limestone casing properly into the infrastructure of the Mirkut. And this is where we see the world's first true flat-sided Mirkut. And this is called the red Mirkut. This is amazing. This is amazing. He has two massive failures before he gets here. They call it the red Merkut because at sunset, in the sun that is actually setting, it looks red. And it is amazing. So what should you take away from this? I always say to people, how many broken Merkutu are in your life? How many times have you decided that you wanted to do something big and you fell short? That you decided that you were going to do something amazing and you weren't able to do it? Maybe you didn't have the resources. Maybe you didn't have the connections. Maybe you didn't have the knowledge. And people around you who sometimes like to see failure, by the way, what do they say? They say things like, who did he think he was to try that? Didn't he know that he's not smart enough? He doesn't have enough money. He doesn't have enough intelligence to do something. And so many of us, after failing, decide that we are no longer going to try. I want you to look at the movements of Seneferu, this incredible ruler who builds two Merkuti that do not work until he actually understands how to build it right, and he is successful. How many broken Merkutu are in your life? You have to keep going until you do what you were put on the earth for. You do until you complete what you were put on the earth for. And so he is actually successful. And you know who his son is? You know who Seneferu's son is? Seneferu's son is the builder of the Great Merkut. So that incredible building that we call the Great Pyramid sometimes, the only remaining of the seven wonders of the world, the only remaining, was built because Khufu was trying to actually honor and improve upon what his father did. We never hear the name Seneferu. Sometimes we hear the name Khufu, but everybody in the world knows about what is usually called the Great Pyramid. And you should know that that is not its name. Its name in English is Khufu on the horizon. Okay? But I want you to know that it is through this great perseverance that we see this excellence. And it is also based on the work of Seneferu. So, very quickly, I just want you to see an image of Khufu. Amazing. Look at the image of Khufu. By the way, the only image we have of Khufu is, and I think this is almost like the creator having a sense of humor, is a 2.5-inch tall small ivory statue that you see on the right. He builds the largest building in the world. It remains a skyscraper, the tallest structure in the world for over 2,000 years. Yet the only image of him is a statue that's 2.5 inches tall. Amazing. It takes 20 years to build. It takes 20 years to build. And we see his sons also build amazingly. First, his son, Jenef Ra, builds something that is pretty much destroyed by the later Arabic people. We see his son, Khafra, build the second Merkut on the Giza Plateau. And we see his grandson, Menkaura, build the third. So when you see those three great Merkutu on the Giza Plateau, you should also not just be thinking about Khufu and his son and grandson, you should also be thinking about Khufu's father, Seneferu, because it is through his perseverance that Khufu was able to do this amazing, amazing work. Does that make sense? I hope you get where I'm going here. I hope you get where I'm going here. And I really wish that we could talk more about these men and their mothers and their wives and what they do, because really what we're seeing is African men following the commitment of their fathers in many ways. And I know we have so many challenges today with fathers, right? I know so many Black men who are in pain because they are missing their fathers. Their fathers weren't the influential part of their life that they needed to be. And when we see African men, Black men, having access to their fathers, actually trying to emulate and build upon the greatness of their fathers and their forefathers, we see them build one of the most amazing sites on the planet. So amazing that initially it is where the prime meridian for the entire earth was actually developed. This is how, when people were trying to decide how the entire world would look at time, they sent the prime meridian through the Great Mirkut. This is how important this is. When you are a great Black father, you are right on time. That's the way I would say it. You are right on time. And so we need to make sure that that's what we're doing. So we got a lot to do in a short period of time. Let's move. It's hard to talk about all this in short. You're muted. I didn't hear you.
I said you got it, Jabari.
Okay, let's try to see if we can do it. Take a look at this. Can you see at the end of the Old Kingdom, we actually see a king come forward at the age of 6. His mother rules for him because he's too young, and he rules for 94 years. He's the longest ruler in human history, a man named Pepi II. And you see him here sitting on the lap of his mother, Ankh-Nesmerire. Please say Pepi II.
Pepi II.
And Ankh-Nesmerire.
Ankh-Nesmerire.
These are the names of these great Africans. Some people believe that because he rules for so long, that the folks around him actually become more powerful, and it leads to some internal strife. It might be one of the reasons why Kemet has a fall, you should know. And as it has a fall, this is also one of the reasons why we actually, I'm not going to go into any of those images. We do not have time. But you should understand that this is why we then see the first intermediate period where Kemet actually has a great fall. From here, we begin to see rulers from the 11th dynasty begin to put things in order. They actually live in the area called Waset, that later the Greeks would call Thebes, and that later the Arabs would call Luxor. So when you hear me say Waset, understand I'm referring to that area that today is called Luxor. But our African ancestors called that Waset, which means something like the seat of dominion. And so it is a powerful city that is in Upper Kemet. It's further into the interior of Africa. It's still a very beautiful city, by the way. Yes, Ankh-Nesmerire is a beautiful name. I agree. For a powerful queen. And so Kemet falls apart. There are lots of people who are in disagreement. They have people who are in control of small areas, not in control of the whole land. And slowly we see 3 kings begin to put things back into order. The first one is known as Ntr Ntpi. And it seems like he has as his plan to put Kemet back together, because his name means the maker of peace in the 2 lands. The maker of peace in the 2 lands. So his plan was to actually slowly put things together. And so he's the Intef, the first Intef. And then his son is known as Intef Wa'ank, or forceful life. And he takes a little bit more land. And then finally, there's a king named Intef Nefer. Intef Nefer. And he is the 3rd Intef king. His name means the strong and beautiful champion. And so he continues to do the work. We have Intef 1, Intef 2, and then finally Intef 3. And then the son of Intef 3 is the powerful ruler known as Mentuhotep. I think I have to give me a sec here. Let me stop. Let me try to get to the point where we can talk specifically just about him. Because you may remember that Mentuhotep is the ruler that I would call the ruler who puts Kemet back into order. Okay, let's see if I can show you this. Here we go. So then we see Mentuhotep come forward, and he is an important ruler. He completes the work, and we know he goes to battle. We know he goes to battle because his name Mentu is a warrior deity. So if his name is Mentuhotep or Mentu is pleased, that means that he was also fighting. That's what that means. And he actually takes 3 different names. And so there is some confusion about him, but he continues to fight. He continues to fight in order to have Kemet become a land again. He seems to fight against people in Canaan and the Nubians too. He's pushing back because all of the people on the periphery were now in control of sections of Kemet. He continues to fight. He also continues to fight against people that they consider Asiatics who had come into the north. And this is a really important ruler who was always depicted with the blackest possible skin. Look at that. And the widest nose and the thickest lips. This is the statue in the Cairo Museum that everyone who looks at, they've already gotten into their head that there's a narrative that the Kemetic people were not of African descent. So when they see his statue, they look confused. I always think that it's hilarious how they look at it, but the reality is that we see that this is a powerful African. And even when we look at his image, his statue in the Metropolitan Museum, this is the one here in New York.
Jabari.
Yes.
You know who that looks like?
Who?
Sorry, Imhotep.
You think so?
A little bit. Just like if you look at it quick and you walk by, you don't think so?
I always think that he looks like Yaphet Kotto, the actor Yaphet Kotto.
Oh, okay. All right.
Who I think passed away a while ago.
We don't have a whole lot of time. Okay.
Yes, we don't. We don't. So look, so you see this powerful king who comes forward and puts Kemet back together. And I'm not going to even talk about these. I don't have time to. But you should know, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum, you're going to see these beautiful models with all these brown people. And they come from the chancellor, the official that works very closely with Mentuhotep, named Meket Ray. And he has all these wonderful models that were found, including these. These also come from that area. These wonderful Nubian soldiers that seem to be working with Mentuhotep. We also know about the wives of Mentuhotep. You should know that they are always, people always say to people, wow, they look like they're always depicted with dark skin. Yes, I think that they are likely dark-skinned women. That's what we're talking about. Powerful. And then we see the 12th dynasty continue. We even see Senusret the third come forward and do some important things. We even see Amenemhat the third, who always is depicted with these large locks. It seems like this brother wore very thick locks. And his daughter seems to have been one of the ladies that ruled Kemet on her own, a queen named Sobek Nefru. Shortly after her time, there's a lot of turmoil that occurs, and we go back into an intermediate period. Kemet has its second great fall. And during this time, actually before this time, we see Kemet actually allow foreign people to come in. Take a look at this. This is a depiction, a drawing of an actual image from a tomb, where we see people who are known as the Hyksos come into Kemet. They're coming in because they had a famine in their land. And the Kemetic people allow them to come in. In a few short generations, they are in control, and they are trying to be quite crude to the Kemetic people, you should know. And so we later see them ruling, particularly from the northern area of Kemet. They take control of Kemet for 200 years, and then we see a group of people come forward to lead a rebellion. One of them is the patriarch known as Sekenere Tau II. By the way, you should know that as you see Sekenere Tau II, he is the one that decides that he is going to try to hold Kemet, to take Kemet back for its native people. And so he starts to wage the rebellion. I was talking about him earlier, right? I was talking about his youngest son earlier. But recognize, as he begins this battle, he loses very quickly to the foreign people, the Hyksos, who are in control. I see a few questions. Is this the story of Joseph? Let me say that it might be what people are arguing the story of Joseph is based on, but Joseph is not. I believe it should be clear to us now that Joseph is actually he is a legendary ruler. He's not a literal person. Because when we look for the archaeological evidence for the existence of a Joseph or existence of Moses, it seems quite clear that he is actually a mythological character, not a literal character.
He never existed.
Not a historical character. That doesn't mean that he's not important. It just means that he's not a literal person. And so when we try to make them literal, we run into challenges because the archaeological record doesn't support it. The textual record outside of the Bible, outside of the Torah, doesn't support it. We have challenges when we do that. Okay. So we see Sekenere Tau II come forward and say he's going to do battle with the Hyksos ruler, by a man by the name of Apepi I. And he loses quickly. In fact, he loses so brutally that some people believe that he was actually killed while he was prone. Maybe he fell from a horse or something, and they killed him with two different instruments, perhaps a spear, maybe an axe. And he is hastily mummified. So it means that this was probably done on the battlefield. And so he loses to the Hyksos. But his eldest son, actually for a little while, convinces the Hyksos that he's going to work with them. And then after that, he leads a surprise attack and he goes up against them too. You killed my father. I'm going to fight you and have the actual native people run Kemet again. He does this, and he actually is successful for about 3 years, but then he is killed. The next person that is left to be in control is but a child. He is King Amos. But you should know that his mother, who was probably absolutely horrified that they killed her husband and her eldest son, she leads the army. She gets on a horse with an axe and leads the army until her son is old enough to join her. These are the folks I said who should be paid maybe by Morgan Freeman as the elder. And then finally we see Kamos come forward as someone that's a little bit older. And then we see maybe someone with the gravitas of an Angela Bassett play the role of Imhotep, riding on a horse with an axe. Can you see her?
Yes.
I can. She's like, yeah, and she's doing battle and leading the army. Move forward. And then her son, who I say should be played by Michael B. Jordan, actually gets old enough to join her in battle. And so this is, I think it should be a wonderful, epic story.
And Imhotep is spelled Aahotep, correct?
Yes, usually it's spelled Aahotep. Usually. Now remember, we are trying to approximate the Kemetic language in in English, in the English language. So you should know that I don't want you to get the impression that there's only one way to spell her name, but that's the common way to spell her name. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So finally, we see Imhotep successful. We see Imhotep successful. And her son Amos continues to lead with her. By the way, look at Imhotep's face. There's Imhotep. This is from her tomb. This is actually her coffin, right? And you can even see that she has this ceremonial burial, the ceremonial axe that she gets. She gets the highest military honor in ancient Kemet. And it is with her and her daughter, her daughter, we don't know if they're full brother and sister, by the way, but her daughter, Queen Amos Nefertari, they actually lead with Amos the beginning of the 18th dynasty. This is where they get to be extremely powerful. And you should know that Queen Amos Nefertari is always depicted with the darkest skin. Look at her there with Amos sitting on the throne. Amos is usually depicted as, you know, a dude that has dark brown skin, but Imhotep, Amos Nefertari is depicted with jet black skin. Jet black skin. And she was considered a lady of great beauty.
That's right.
So it is because of these rulers that we actually see that Kemet returns to the ownership, the control of the later people, of the native people. They expel the Hyksos. And you should know that people often believe, historians often say now, that the Hyksos are the people who would become the Hebrews. That the Hyksos are the people that have become the Hebrews. But the story you've been told about them is a lot different than the one I'm telling you now. I know you haven't heard it this way. This is the one that is corroborated by archaeological evidence, by extra biblical evidence. This is the one that likely tells how those people that would later be called the Hebrews were sent out of Kemet. And you should know that Amos, the final king that leads the battle, he actually chases them to the area that we would have known as Canaan and defeats them. And so this is important. By the way, you should, if you can, do you see this guy, Scottish Tom, that on YouTube? Can you boot him if you can?
Kick him off? Okay, no problem.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, because that's the racist code that they use. We was Kangs. That's what they do. So get rid of that.
Yep, he's out of here. He's blocked.
Yeah, just get rid. So they don't think we know what it is. So it's a way for them to mock us. But you know, Jabari has been doing this for a long time. I've seen you trolls before. Goodbye, Scottish Tom. Okay, let's go. So that is the third area, right? That's the third period. That's the third golden era. We see that Kemet becomes an incredible, a powerful land. This is when it becomes what do you call it? This is when it actually becomes an empire. We see King Imhotep come forward. He is the son of Amos and Amos Nefertari. We see Jehotimes the First, who was a powerful king, the son of Imhotep the First. And we actually see that he is likely the person that builds the Valley of the Kings and Queens. This is so important because there are literally over 100 burials there. It becomes a royal burial place for the next 500 years, all because of the work of that one king. His daughter is the queen Hatshepsut. She will later become a lady that rules in her own right. And she'll even send an expedition deeper into Africa to meet the rulers of the land that they called Puenet, the land that they call Punt, The queen was a lady named Queen Eti. She was a large lady, as you can see. They depict her being a large lady with a large derriere. And we also see her husband, a man by name of Parehu. And that, to me, is fascinating. These are folks that live deeper into the interior of Africa. And they had great reverence for them. So a lot of things go on here, folks. You should just know that the Kemetic people continue to move and thrive. Let's see, why is this not moving? Hatshepsut even builds this wonderful tomb, mortuary temple, I should say, on the other side of where the Valley of the Kings and Queens are. And so this is an amazing thing. Kemet continues. Kemet continues to strive. I'm going to actually move forward to the final period. And eventually what happens is, you know, after this wonderful period, we do see another time when the other people in the land are actually becoming more powerful. And they get to the point where things begin to wane again. And as things begin to wane, after King Tutankhamen, after Ramses the Great, after all of these powerful rulers that live during the New Kingdom, we actually see that we get all the way towards the period where Kemet has another great fall, where foreign people begin to come into the land. And they've actually been there for a long period of time. They might have been there for over 100 years, but they get onto the throne and they have lots of disagreements amongst each other. They even say that they are going to take away the power of the temple of Amun. And they ask for assistance from the people to the south. And that is when we see these wonderful rulers, the final golden age of ancient Kemet come into existence. You can share this image too. This one is actually from the National Geographic magazine, and it depicts how the Nubians come forth from Nubia to lead a great battle. This is how they put Kemet back together. And I'll say that sometimes they try to actually depict the Nubians as African and the Kemetic people as something other than African, simply because there were times that they disagreed and there were times that they got along. And that's ridiculous. Simply because we see people that live in the same region have disagreements, that doesn't mean they're a different ethnic or racial group. We're looking at a battle between Russia, who is really picking on the Ukraine right now.
Exactly.
Nation.
Right.
To their west. Does that mean that they are of a different ethnicity? No, it does not. And so that is the ridiculous argument that folks who are trying to call the Kemetic people something other than African do. That is what they do. But their arguments fall on foolish and illogical grounds. So, but we do see these wonderful kings come forward to lead Kemet into its final golden era. It seems to start with a king by the name of Kashta. That's usually how his name is translated. But Kashta should mean something like the Kushite. That's all. He's the one that seems to put the different groups of people that today we call Nubian together. Now, you should know that Nubia is likely a later term. They probably call themselves Kushitic. And there were lots of different groups of people, right? Kashta actually unifies all these groups of people under one nation. And he begins to rule from the area that is known as Napata today. It's 400 miles north of the modern kingdom, the modern capital city of the Sudan, known as Khartoum. And slowly we begin to see that they begin to have more influence in Kemet as they try to put it together. Before they go into Kemet with an army, Kashta sends his daughter Amenertis to actually be one of the highest ranking people in the Temple of Amun. So we can see that there is not just battle that occurs, there's collaboration. There's collaboration. And so then we see Kashta's son, Pa, who historians used to call Pianki, decide that they are going to slowly move in with an army to try to put Kemet back together. Here's the statue of Amanirdis. Her title is sometimes called in English God's Wife of Amun. I don't like the term God, but that's, if you're going to do work on her, research on her, that's what you're going to have to look at up. She is a powerful, powerful lady. And in fact, most of them then are buried in Merkutu in Kush, mostly at El Kuru, which is where Kashta is buried, and in other places, also the place known as Merowe. These are places that they actually are. So Pa comes forward with his army. He has, in the 20th year of his reign, he comes forward with his army, and they stop to purify themselves in the Temple of Amun in Waset before they go forward to put things in Kemet back together. He actually leaves before it's really complete. There's one guy that says that he agrees that Kemet is back together and under the control of Pa. Pa goes back to Nubia, back to Kush, and then that same guy says, no, I don't agree. I'm still in control myself. And it is the brother of Pa that comes into control, a man named Chabaka. And Chabaka comes forward and finalizes the complete reunification of Kemet. Look at the image of Chabaka on the right. He continues to battle with the Assyrians and possibly even the Persians, but eventually he cannot hold back the power of Assyria. He is defeated in battle, and he has to go back into Kush. But you should know that while he is in Kemet, they start to take things that are falling apart in Kemet, and they try to put them back into great order. One of those things was a papyrus that he says was worm-eaten, and he carves it in stone. Today, it is known as the Chabaka stone, and sometimes it is said to encode what is sometimes called Memphite theology. It is the creation story of the city known as Kamenu by the Kemetic people. I'm sorry, Menefer by the Kemetic people. And the Greeks end up calling that city Memphis. Yes, Memphis is not just a city in Tennessee. It was named after the Greek name of a city that the Kemetic people called Menefer, built in perfection. Yes, then we see Taharqa come into control. Taharqa is fighting and fighting. He is not able to hold back the Syrians. He goes back to Kush. The son of Taharqa, Tantamani, actually he's the nephew of Taharqa, Tantamani, is in Kush, but he tries to go back into Kemet, and he's successful for a moment, but he is still defeated. And this is the last time that the Kushites will be able to try to put Kemet together. This is when Kemet begins to have its final fall. This is when the other folks in the region are actually powerful enough to keep Kemet from returning to its formal glory. But you should know that the Kushites actually have nearly 600 years of power afterwards, that Kush remains an extremely important city. You're seeing the city that was their capital. Look at these are the ruins of the city of Napata. They are powerful for much longer. Here go the Merkutu, some of the Merkutu that they built. Take a look at this aerial view. Now, the Westerners, the Europeans that came and were plunderers searching for treasure would literally dynamite the tops of them off so that they would be able to rappel down and steal and pilfer. But you should know that while Kemet has now it's believed that it has 118 Merkutu, or pyramids. You should know that Kush has over 200. And they were built later. I get this question all the time. Did they begin it earlier? No. They actually built it later, but they certainly built more. They tend to be steeper. Can you see how the sides are steeper? But they still are able to continue to do amazing things until Kush has its fall at a later date. Look at these these are recreated. These are actually been put back together. Beautiful, beautiful structures in this city known as Meroe. In fact, the Kushites continue to be powerful, so powerful that as the Romans come into Kemet, after the Assyrians, after the Persians, then we see the Greeks, then we see the Romans. At that time, we even see the queens of Kush come up into Kemet and continue to pester the Romans. One of them, they called the dirty one-eyed Candace. And they called her that because she was an incredible ruler and warrior. Her name was Amani Rhaenus, and she would continually come up into Kemet as soon as the Romans had their backs turned, and she would cause them nightmares. At one time, they actually decided they were going to ambush her, and she fights herself with her honor guard. She fights so diligently that she actually loses an eye and continues to fight until she wins. This is how powerful this great queen, Amani Rhaenus, is.
I know that's right.
Now, you should know that the Romans called her Candace. That's where we get the modern name Candace from. But the Kushitic people called these great queens the Kandake. The Kandake.
Can you spell that, Jabari?
Well, keep in mind that we're only approximating what it would look like. But Kandake would usually be spelled. It looks like I got. I've been in here so long I got locked out. It says. So Kandake is usually spelled Kandake. Kandake, the Kandake. And I would love for people to tell these people that have the name Candace that they are named after a powerful queen. These Kandake actually ruled in their own right. They ruled in the way that a king would rule. There were 13 of them who do this. They are so powerful. And can you see that Kandake Amanatore on the left is in the smiting pose? Can you see that?
Yes.
That's the same pose that we see, a version of the pose that we see Narmer literally 3,000 years earlier. This is powerful. This is powerful. So I want you to understand, family, that while we've gone through these 4 important periods, Kemet lives on in Kush for quite some time. That we actually should recognize that as we look at the narrative of how our African ancestors put together this great nation, we have to remember that if we're trying to understand what they did and how they did it, and how Africa was the basis of this great nation, we should look at it in its 4 golden eras. The era that was put into existence by King Narmer, put into existence by King Mentuhotep, put into existence by King Amos, and put into existence by King Chabaka. Now, I want you to understand this is shorthand. I would love to tell you, obviously, about Mentuhotep. We did talk about her, the Queen of Narmer. We could talk about all of these great ladies that were powerful here. In fact, King Amos, in some ways, he would not even come to the reign were it not for his mother, Queen Imhotep. And so understand that as we see these periods, we are seeing Africans do what they do, give civilization to the world.
That's right. Do what we do, give civilization to the world, people.
They ought to be. Yes. So with that, That was not easy to do that in that period of time. Obviously, I'll need to come back and talk about some of the periods we talked about in greater detail. I'm willing to do that. And as we're able to do that in greater detail, we can even talk to you about some of the spiritual concepts that should flow out of this narrative. This was mostly history today, but we should understand that the stories of our ancestors tell us how to live. And when we understand how to live, we understand how to be. When we understand how to be, we're understanding how to embrace the call to higher consciousness and be spiritually aligned and balanced. So with that, I turn things over back to you. I got to run to do a class.
Yes, I just want to say thank you so much, Jabari, for coming on and giving us this.
Welcome.
Yes, and so we can talk offline about having you back on because people have so many questions, and we can go into the four eras in greater depth, just like you said. So I'm going to say Shema Ma'at to Jabari. I know he has to run, so
go forth in divine peace. I'll see you soon.
You'll see me soon. Go forth in balance.
All right,
Thank
peace.
you. So Tuesday Talk family, thank you so much yet again for just really making this possible. We have over 100 people here. We've had that number or close to it for quite a while. If there's a question that you couldn't get to, I'm sorry, that I couldn't get to, or that you would like an answer to or whatever, what you can do is you can, where could you text this? You could text me at, not text. I'm sorry, that is not what I meant. This is my, this is me on Facebook, okay? You can text me these questions. You know what? You can do this on Facebook or Instagram because the Shrines DMs, we get a lot of information, a lot of questions and stuff, and stuff there. So questions specifically for this, and also it can help me put together other Tuesday talks where you have questions on history and stuff like that, questions on history and spirituality. I'd be happy to put something together, work with Jabari. We can have more time. He just had to roll out. So we had a hard stop, which is unusual with Jabari. We just kind of go on until we get it done. So just let me know and put it there. Yes, big respect. Absolutely. Jabari comes through all the time. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Shankai. I appreciate that. Yes. You're welcome, you guys. Thank you so much. I really, truly am humbled about with this year of Tuesday Talk. I've gotten so much great feedback. So for what I'm saying for you guys today and right now, give me some specific questions, because then I can go back to Jabari and we can make his appearance address some of these questions. It can be embedded into the presentation, and we can get that history out in bite-sized pieces so that you can also do your own study. This does not replace your own study. My suggestion is you get a notebook. Listen, your girl is not playing when I say get a notebook. Get you a notebook like you in college. I just got another notebook. All right. Oh, it's not flipping. Sorry. Whatever. You know what a notebook looks like. Get a notebook. And maybe it's Tuesday Talk is the title. Get a notebook. Maybe, Ascension is the title, because you're going to learn a lot here in Tuesday Talk and in Ascension as well. Or label it how you want. The history of Kemet, the 4 great eras, whatever. All right. Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the comments. I look forward to the feedback. And just remember, people, we are great. We came from greatness. We are great. We're going to continue to be great. And Shema Ma'at, which means go forth in balance, go forth in divine balance, live in the divine balance that our ancestors lived in right next to the Hapi and was able to create this amazing civilization. Okay. Shema Ma'at. Much more to the family.